Good morning, ma'am, and one and all present here. Today, we Group 11 are going to present to you our foundation course project on the topic Consumer Rights and Protection with respect to the Consumer Protection Act. I am Shastika Pillai and I am going to give you a brief introduction on our topic. What do we understand by consumer rights? A consumer is a person or a group who wants to buy or purchase goods or services. We are consumers. Consumer rights are those rights which protect us from harmful sales practices. Next line. There are six main consumer rights. They are right to choose, right to be informed, right to be heard, right to safety, right to seek redressal, and right to consumer education. Right to choose. A consumer has all rights and freedom to choose any kind of product he wants. No seller can influence his choice or make an unfair manner. Right to be informed. The consumer has rights to be informed about the product, that about its color, its size, its potency, or its standard. A consumer should be insisting to tell the seller about the information of the product. Right to be heard. This means that all complaints and grievances of the consumer needs to be heard by any forum. Right to safety. Every consumer has a right to safety from the product. Consumer can insist on the quality check of goods and can check such standardization marks such as an ISI or an AgMark sign. Right to seek redressal. This right provides compensation to the consumers against unfair trade practices. Right to consumer education. Every consumer has to be informed about their rights, and ignorance of the consumers is the main reason they are exploited. They should know their rights and exercise them in a proper manner. Now I hand it over to Kamal to explain the duties and responsibilities of a consumer.
The duties and responsibilities of a consumer are: first, insist on receipts or bill without fail on purchases made. Second, read information carefully on the packets before purchase, that is, the date of manufacturing and the date of expiry. Third, do not feel tempted by misleading advertisements or false malpractices. Fourth, buy standardized products only. Fifth, filing consumer complaints against default in goods deficiency in services or malpractices. Sixth, relying on self-help, meaning that the consumer should not depend on seller for information and choice as far as possible. Seventh, proof of transactions and documents related to the durable goods should be preserved, that is, guarantee, warranty, and invoice of the product. Lastly, consumers should not make rough use of product in the guaranteed period, thinking it will be replaced in the guarantee period. This is unfair on their part. The objectives of the topic are to understand the concept of consumer protection in India, to outline the need for the consumer protection, to describe the rights and the responsibilities of consumers, to understand main provisions of the Consumer Act, lastly, to outline machinery for settlement of consumer grievances. Moving on to concept of consumer protection, the Consumer Protection Act 1986 was act of the Parliament of India enacted to protect the interest of the consumers of India. The act is regarded as Magna Carta for the checking unfair practices or malpractices in India. It has led to establishment of widespread network of consumer forums and appellate courts all over India. Lastly, it has significantly impacted business approaches, consumers, and have empowered consumers to a great extent. Passing on to Sanika.
So now I would like to highlight why there is a need for consumer protection. And why and how are consumers exploited? So first of all, sellers easily mislead consumers by giving wrong information about the size, quality, reliability, and utility of the product. In order to amass a illegitimate profit, businessman creates artificial scarcity by hoarding. They sell it at a higher price, which ultimately makes the consumer spend more. Traders often charge higher price than prescribed retail price at local retail shops. More often than not, sellers and producers sell goods and services of substandard quality, especially selling of medicines and food packets beyond their expiry dates. Here are a few examples of consumer exploitation. The first picture shows that a salesman is misleading the mother by giving her false information. The second and third picture shows situations where higher prices are charged and artificial scarcity has been created. Now, these set of illustrations highlight how consumers are fooled and lied on the pretext of so-called good quality and imported products. Such malpractices highlighted before give rise to need for consumer protection. Now, one of the main reasons consumers are kept away from their respective rights is because they may be illiterate, poor, or from rural areas. Therefore, suppliers exploit them by different and unfair means and banned practices. Hence, there is a prior need to educate the consumers and tell them about their particular rights. There is also a need to know whether the supplier has implemented the act or not. So illiteracy is one of the major reasons that leads to exploitation of consumers, and also literate consumers who know about their rights hardly ever use them due to ignorance of rights or lethargy. Consumer movement arises from dissatisfaction of consumers as a result of unfair practices by sellers and a lack of legal system to protect them from such exploitation. In India, in the 1960s, a consumer organization was formed that engaged in writing practicals and holding exhibitions. However, more recently, India witnessed an upsurge in consumer groups and the government was pressured to correct business conduct in the favor of interests of consumers. In 1986, a major step was taken by the enactment of the Consumer Protection Act 1986, also known as COPRA. Now handing it over to Kirtana.
Okay, so moving on to the Consumer Protection Act 2019. It was passed on 9th August 2019. It is a repealing statute, thereby repealing more than 3-decade-old law of Consumer Protection Act 1986. The objectives of the new act are establishment of the Central Consumer Protection Authority CCPA, product liability option, establishment of the mediation center, introduce filling by video conferencing, the imposition of higher penalties, e-commerce included within the ambit of consumer protection. Moving on to the comparison between the 1986 Act and the 2019 Act. First point, product liability. In 1986 Act, no provision was made, whereas in 2019 Act, claim for product liability can be made against the manufacturer, service, and other seller for compensation. Second, consumer did not expressly include online transaction and shopping or any other electronic means shopping, whereas 2000 Act included all electronic means shopping. Third, unfair trade practices. 1986 Act includes false or misleading representation, assigning a warranty guarantee that is not based on adequate testing, etc. Whereas 2019 Act widens scope of unfair trade practices by including failure to issue a bill or receipt, refusal to accept a good return within 30 days, and disclosure of personal information given in confidence. Fourth point, jurisdiction for filing of a complaint. In 1986 Act, the jurisdiction had to be filed before the commission within whose jurisdiction the opposite party resides or carries on business. Whereas in 2019 Act, complaint can also be filed before the commission within whose jurisdiction the complaint resides or works. Fifth point, pecuniary jurisdiction of commissions. In 1986 Act, it states that district up to rupees 20 lakh, state rupees 20 lakh to rupees 1 crore, national above rupees 1 crore. Whereas in 2019 Act, district up to rupees 1 crore, state rupees 1 crore to rupees 10 crore, national above rupees 10 crore. 6 point, power to review orders. In 1986 Act, the National Commission can review any order passed by it if there is an error, whereas in 2019 Act, the district, state, and national commission have the power to review orders passed by them if there is an error. 7-point penalties. If in 1986 Act, if orders of the Commission not compiled is punishable with imprisonment for 1 month to 3 years, or a fine for rupees 2,000 to rupees 10,000, or both. Whereas in 2019 Act, the imprisonment is same, but the fine for rupees 25,000 to rupees 1 lakh, or both. 8 point, the Central Consumer Protection Authority, yet to be constituted. In 1986 Act, no provision was made for the same, whereas in 2019 Act, CCPA is to regulate matters relating to violation of rights of consumer, unfair trade practices, and many more things. 9 point, e-commerce. No provision was made for the same in 1986 Act, whereas in 2019 Act defines uh, direct selling, e-commerce, and electronic service provider. The central government is empowered to prescribe rules for preventing unfair trade practices in e-commerce and direct selling. Passing on to Simon.
Now moving on to the questionnaire analysis. Majority of the people we approached were students and employees between the age of 18 to 22. Most of them are familiar with consumer rights, either fully or partially. They are aware of the different rights and how much importance it plays in the society. Right to seek redressal and right to a healthy environment were the two consumer rights which people were least familiar with. Seeking redressal or compensation is one of those rights which they have experienced the least. Some were unsure and some wanted changes in the consumer rights, while there were only 11% who didn't want any. Majorly, no change in the rights were required according to them, but they believe that the implementation is weak, which thereafter causes the consumer to be exploited. Many believe that justice is not provided to the consumer, and the reason, as said above, is the poor implementation. 86% of the respondents would fight for justice by going to the Consumer Redressal Forum if denied of their rights. They believe that it is their duty to fight so as to protect them as well as the other consumer from being exploited by the same. Only a few have exercised these consumer rights and actually fought. The major instances were caused through online shopping where the product was either defective or different from what it was shown. 68% of the respondents were satisfied with the behavior and how the shopkeeper attended to the complaint, while others didn't get the desired results. Most of the people are aware of the consumer courts but never filed a case. The reason behind the time consumption and the effort that they have to put. One of the extra point that came out from the survey is that majority of the people that we approach were literate, so they know about the consumer rights and how one has to proceed if their rights are violated. But the major exploitation is done towards the illiterate who are unaware of the act and do not know how to deal when not provided with the same. Now I hand it over to Sanik. Now I hand it over to now I, now I hand it over to Mansi to tell us more about the topic.
Consumer Complaint Redressal Mechanism. In case of any deficiencies in services, the consumer can approach consumer courts constituted under the Act. After the commencement of new Consumer Protection Act 2019, consumer complaints can now be registered electronically. The whole educating procedure has been simplified by not just permitting electronic filing but empowering and authorizing district and state consumer forums to address to review applications and also advise mediation. Consumer court is a three-tier system of courts: national level, state level, and district level, where a grieved consumer can approach as per the valuation of matter in concern and adjudicating of disputes once the issues of the matter in dispute are recognized. The further step is to understand the pecuniary limit jurisdiction of the case. What remedies are available to an aggrieved consumer? Grievance redressal mechanism of service provider. One of the first steps that an aggrieved consumer shall consider is to approach the grievance redressal mechanism or authority of the service provider. Sending of legal notice prior to availing of statutory remedies and approaching the consumer forum, it is advisable that the aggrieved consumer exhaust any alternative legal remedies available to him or her One of the actions that can be taken by consumer before approaching the consumer court is to send legal notice to the service provider detailing the particulars of complaint, relief sought for, time period to comply with the conditions, and cautioning the service provider of legal recourse in the event of non-compliance of terms and conditions of the notice. File consumer complaint before appropriate forum. If the service provider fails to comply with the terms and conditions mentioned in the legal notice or disagrees to compensate for the loss caused, the complainant has the right to file a legal complaint in the consumer forum. Admissibility of complaint by forum. Section 36 of the Act prescribes that after the filing of consumer complaint, district forum shall revert on admissibility of the complaint within the span of 21 days from the date of filing, failing which shall be deemed to be admitted and approved. Mediation. According to Section 37, if the respective forum considers mediation as a viable option for settlement, it may be with the consent of parties advise them to opt for mediation. In that case, contesting parties are required to provide written consent within 5 days from such proposal to the forum. If mediation fails, case shall fall back to the forum. It is pertinent to mention that according to section 81, no appeal can be filed and entertained by respective forum against the order passed by mediation. Review application. If the complainant is not satisfied with the verdict passed by District Consumer Forum, then he/she can file a review application in the same forum within 30 days from the date of pronouncement of the order. In case the complainant is not satisfied by the order on review application, the aggrieved can appeal to the next higher judicial authority, that is state consumer, within 45 days from the date of passage of order. Filing appeal with National Commission. Similarly, if the complainant is not satisfied with the order passed by the State Commission, aggrieved can file a review application in the same forum within a period of 30 days from the date of passage of the order. Otherwise, if aggrieved by the order passed by State Forum, he can has the right to appeal to National Forum within 30 days from the date of order given by previous forum. Thank you.